Step into the shadows with Paranormal M. Get ready to hear some first accounts of experiences with the paranormal. We update videos daily and appreciate your attendance. Subscribe, drop an M in the comment box or your own thoughts, and join us on a thrilling expedition through our latest enigmatic stories. We hope you're ready for an immersive experience. I think my instincts saved my life. This was last night. I'm currently here in Arizona. The full or almost full moon was up. Now, if you live like in a city or somewhere near a forest, you probably don't know how bright it can actually get on a full moon. For some reason, I've gotten really into mapping. Me and my little cousin made one big crudely constructed map of the desert surrounding our campground. We wanted to explore more in the night. So, when darkness set upon the desert, we ventured out into the dark. My grandpa made this super cool wooden sword for me. It has spikes all around it. It would hurt really bad if you were hit by it. I guess that if some crazy person or a coyote came after us, I could either scare it off or beat it away. We moved around half a mile from camp. We came to the wash. For anybody who doesn't know, when it rains, it rains in the desert. Water can flow and create rivers. When the water is gone, the empty rivers are still there. These are called washes. Some can be huge, some can be a few feet wide. This one is about 100 feet wide. We were walking down the wash. Being able to see everything and having a spiked club, we weren't really scared of anything. We went to see the dead, the skeletal body of a falcon, which we dubbed Anakin after the Jedi who was cut to pieces by his master. Then returned to the wash, being careful around shadows in case anything was hiding in them. After about 20 minutes of exploring, we came to a part of the wash where the walls curved in by a few feet. This change was barely noticeable, as the wash was still huge. However, as we were about to enter this small spot, I got this terrifying feeling in my stomach. Wanted to run, to ditch my cousin and get away from there. Instead, I grabbed his arm, told him that we should go back. He turned around and walked back to our camp, the whole time blabbing about a custom Smash character. I followed him, and I got that feeling again, but around 5 times stronger. I stopped walking and turned around. Standing where the walls curved in was what looked to be a man. He was huge, at least 7 feet tall. It looked naked in the light, but I didn't see any sort of genitals. The legs of the creature were bent backwards under the knees, like wolves and dogs. Said legs were small, and the monster's arms were longer than I was tall. I'm 5'10". I couldn't see its face, but I highly doubt I wanted to. If the thing stood on its back legs, it would maybe be 10-14 feet tall. The creature didn't attack though. All it did was crawl. Yeah, crawl. It crawled back up the wash wall and into the bushes. The crawling was perfect. The knees didn't even touch the ground. It wasn't like a baby crawl. It was more of a girl from the ring crawl. The moment it disappeared into the bushes, I ran. I grabbed my cousin's arm and dragged him all the way back to the campsite. I have no doubt in my mind that if I had gone any further, I would be dead right now. I don't think my pathetic wooden club would do any damage to that thing. I told my family that I saw a coyote and that I was freaked out by it. They wouldn't believe me if I told them what I saw. I don't want to leave the trailer now. I don't want to go outside at all. I want to know if anybody else has seen something like this in Arizona. That thing is still out there. I want to know what it is. The Weird Cat. There was one night that always seemed to replay through my mind. Even years later, I still can't get over it. 10 years my brother spent the night with me as I began living with my grandparents for very personal reasons. It seemed odd, but I remember we were in the front room. My brother was on MySpace. I think I was watching what I remember to be Full Metal Alchemist on the TV. Our grandpa had a habit of turning the thermostat to below room temperature because he would get hot easily. As I was watching my show, I noticed that I could see my breath as I breathed. Condensation. I looked at my brother and expressed how ridiculously cold it had gotten in the room. I decided to get up and change the thermostat until I noticed the most strangest thing as I entered the other room. The other rooms in the house were basically room temperature, but the dining room was practically freezing. My grandparents only had one unit, and that unit would keep all the rooms the same temperature when being used. I walked back into the dining room to tell my brother what was going on, till something ran past my feet and I stumbled. Now, I will state that my grandparents have a cat. His name is Harley. He is dumber than a sack of potatoes, but very lovable. However, this wasn't him. Harley was sleeping on the sofa in the same room that we were in. I looked up into the next room, and on the top of this old sewing machine that my grandmother had was this strange cat-like creature. Description: sitting on the top of the sewing machine was this somewhat large cat. It had ears, but no mouth, no nose, just two black pits for eyes, white organic fleshy material for skin. Weirdly enough, it had a hue of purple on its back, but the main attention was its dark, gaping eyes, as if they were lifeless. It stared at me for about 20 seconds before jumping down, walked toward the wall, and just faded out like someone Photoshop took the opacity, just turned it down till it vanished. My mind was stumped and shocked. I turned to my brother, realized that he had a shocked look on his face as well. I remember the exact words that came out of his mouth. This was that night after seeing it. "Dude, did you see that freaky ass cat?" This guy jumps up from the computer and yells, "You saw that too!" I wish we had smartphones back then. I've had 3 incidences which I could have taken a picture of the weird crap that goes on, but it never crosses my mind because I'm trying to process what the hell is in fact going on. The strangest part of this is that after that faded away, there were voices coming from the kitchen, as if a number of people had appeared and were throwing a party. And let me just say, these voices were loud. However, no one in the house was woken up from it. Aunt and grandparents. Neither did the cat, which was freakishly odd. It was 3 a.m. when this all happened. It lasted till 3:04, 3:06 a.m. I know that from research that 3 a.m. is the witching hour. But it's just a coincidence. Or has anybody else experienced something like this? Me and my brother have seen ghosts since being young teens, now being in our late 20s. So I was 16, my brother was 14. We had both always had an overactive imagination as very young kids, and had always been scared of being alone at our grandparents', because their crib was always creepy. One day I had to use the bathroom, and my grandparents were outside. They were fixing up our vegetable garden. As a wuss, I asked Nick, "Yo, dude, would you follow me into the house so I can go use the bathroom?" Nick, judgingly disappointed, goes, "Fine." As I'm in the hallway bathroom, my brother begins looking at the photos hung on the walls of our family, and I'm quickly tending to my business. The next thing I know, as I'm about to walk out of the bathroom, Nick says, "Dude, there's someone in the gaming room." I walk out and peer into the same room that he's looking into, and for the first time in my teenage life, I froze with utter confusion. Because obviously, this person was not a person, and clearly wasn't a human being. Description: there was a translucent gray ghost that was floating at least 8 inches off the floor, staring at a cross that was nailed to the wall in the game room. It had thin white hair, looked like it was thinning out from old age. It was also wearing a long nightgown, which was also a gray whitish color. The weirdest thing that I'd noticed was the strange smoky mist coming from it, which seemed to be evaporating into the air. In a floating-like style, it turned around and looked at us. This ghost had no face. Its face looked like those depictions of Slender Man. To this day, I still can't believe how fast we ran out of that house, screaming, laughing our asses off. 2 days later, I came back over myself and found that the cross had broken off the wall. It was made of marbled clay. Pieces of it were still on the wall, strangely enough. Even to this day, Nick and I can describe what we saw and what happened. Our description of this ghost are both the same. We never believed in this stuff as teenagers, but that day made us into believers. The Haunting of Dobby, Story 2. The event. A month had passed after the floating man had appeared. Me and my brother were still bugged. We were needing answers to what had happened. Mostly because no one would believe us, not our parents nor our friends. So we decided to grab a camera and a candle for the brave mission of finding proof. After 2 hours of going room to room with no luck, we ended up in the master bedroom of our grandparents' house. Nick laid the candle on the bathroom sink in the bedroom. I went to take pictures in the darkness. Out of nowhere, the camera dies. We were weirded out because the batteries were brand new, as I was the one who opened the pack and slapped those energy-filled babies in. Confused, I changed the batteries with new ones that were in my pocket, which strangely also died. With the loss of our camera and no Energizer Bunny batteries, we decided to give up. I looked at Nick and said, "Dude, how can we suck this bad at ghost hunting?" We laughed, and we turned on the light and decided to leave. But I noticed Nick had forgotten the candle. I decided to fetch the strangely now extinguished candle, and as I entered the doorframe into the bathroom, I froze. I noticed something was staring at me. Description: the master bathroom is made of 2 rooms. one with a giant mirror and a sink. Then on the left side of this room is a doorway to another room. That has a shower and a toilet. As I look down toward the left doorway, there's a little shadowy figure peeking over the doorframe. It leaned in more to get a better look at me. It was solid black, darker than the darkness in the room, all except for its eyes. They were solid white. I jumped back about 6 feet from the bathroom. Nick, looking at me, goes, "Dude, what's wrong?" I looked at him in disbelief and replied, "Look in there, and look at the bottom left." He sticks his head into the bathroom, and not even 3 seconds later he screams, grabbing the door, slamming it. "What the fuck?" That's all he could say. I pulled the camera out of my pocket and tried to turn it on to get a shot of it, but with no avail. We looked at each other and decided to take another look. He opened the door and the little ghost was gone. Weirdly, he didn't see this thing at the time, so in my curiosity, I needed to know what Nick had seen. After asking him, his description was shocking to me. He described that he saw a 3-foot-tall little man. This little man was peeking around the corner with white eyes. Freaked out, we decided to leave and process what just happened. As we walked out of the master bedroom, the camera came back on at full battery level and working properly to our disbelief. We later named that ghost Dobby, like the elf from Harry Potter. Night shifts in an old warehouse. So 4 years ago, I got hired to do night shifts as a security guy. It's in a very old building. Dates back to 1917, but fairly good and renovated. Except for some parts. I've worked here for 2 years. Part of the job is leaving the front desk and walking 2 big closing rounds, as they call them, to check for any dangers, like open windows, potential fire dangers, electronics that are still on, mostly at the selling desks and the magazine rooms backstage. The first time I got spooked quite heavily was because of the mannequins. When doing my first round, I walked past quite a lot of mannequin, and at the second floor there's a lot of designer clothing. I like them, so I remembered how some of those mannequins were positioned. The second round, I walked some of the mannequins and they were facing the opposite side as they previously were. This was within my first, maybe month of working here. About 3 months later, while checking the stock rooms, the radio was still turned on at the 3rd floor. While walking toward it and checking the clothing hanging there, I saw a vague pale face with black long hair staring at me from between some of the clothing hanging there. I full out sprinted toward the door. I was scared shitless. I couldn't be a person since, well, it couldn't be a person since the clothes hanging there were fairly high up, but I didn't see any legs. At this point, I was questioning my decision to work here. Called in sick for a few shifts. Decided to try again, one more time. Fast forward a few months while checking out the kitchen, I heard whispers coming from the freezer area. Scared as fuck, but I wanted to be 100% sure. So, I took out my phone, started recording a voice memo, got closer to the freezer. After being there for more than maybe 5 seconds, realizing it got louder, I had actual proof on my phone, I ran downstairs. I waited at the desk to finally be able to leave this place. I kept listening to the voice memo. I never realized something like this would actually happen to me. I'm a very down-to-earth guy, never believed in paranormal stuff, but this shook me to the core. After this last occurrence, I stopped working there. I keep getting visited by my dead wife. When I was about 16, I met my now deceased wife. We were childhood lovers and stuck with each other with relative ease through our teen and adult years. We didn't argue that much, and when we did, it was finished as quickly as it started. We have 2 kids together, and we're a pretty normal household. My wife was a very spiritual person. She was very much into magic and spirits. She wasn't a loony, just a tad obsessive. Anyways, she passed away 2 years ago due to a lost battle with cancer. It pretty much destroyed me. Felt as though the light of my life was taken away from me. I hadn't experienced that pain in my life often, but when I did, I rarely got over it. Just a few months ago, I started having problems with my sleep. At first, it was little things. Waking up in a sweat, having difficulty breathing, waking up and crying. But then it slowly began to get worse. I started seeing my wife in my dreams. She kept calling out for me. I couldn't move toward her, and I couldn't speak either. I always woke up from these as soon as my wife came close to me. Didn't stop there. A few days after I started having dreams, I began seeing my wife's face in reflections of stuff. Things like the windows, pots and pans, kitchen utensils. Anything that was reflective. It showed her standing behind me. And when it didn't, it showed her standing a few feet behind me in the corner of the room. During this time, I had my children sent to my parents. Due to the fact I was on medication, didn't want them to see me going through it. Anyways, I've started hearing her. Not speak, more like when you think you hear someone call your name, but you're not 100% sure whether you actually heard someone or not. Objects in my room are moved, not by a lot, just a few centimeters, but I can still tell. It's just one of those things, you know? But yeah, stuff is still getting worse. Caught on camera. Over several weeks, it progressed from little things to very, very strange things. We tried to get it blessed one day. This was the day I seen it with my own eyes. They were going from room to room, saying prayers, and saying what people say when they're trying to get rid of spirits from a home. This house was an old house. The doors have this glossy clear coat, so you can still see your figure in the door. I was standing at the door while they were blessing this one room. As they started the prayer, I see something go past me in the reflection on the door. I also felt a gust of wind. I tried really hard to talk myself out of actually seeing that. I was sort of in denial of what just happened. While talking myself out of it, I was still very curious. Wanted to know if I was going crazy or if that actually happened. Wish I hadn't felt so curious. The next day after blessing the house, it was less active, but we all decided to go out on the memorial, leave the laptop camera on to see what happens when we're not home. We go out and it's all good. We forget we left the camera on and just go about our day. After a few hours, we call it a day and head back home. Once we hit the driveway, we got excited to see if we caught anything. We weren't expecting what we saw and what we heard. We grabbed the laptop. It automatically stopped itself at some point, and we start watching it. We had it face down the hallway from the end room, which also captures the front door through the kitchen. My uncle waves at the camera, closes the front door. As soon as that front door closed, something was thrown at the room door from the closet. It was in the room that the laptop was in. We seen just the arm of something in the corner of the shot, as the camera was not in the closet. The item that was thrown looked like a black book, and what followed was a demonic voice. It was saying things we couldn't understand, followed by little kid footsteps running around the house and crying. We were so scared by what we had witnessed, we didn't want to watch the end of the video. We tried to look for what was thrown at the door. There was nothing. We felt a heavy urge to delete that video and not talk about it. As this happened after the movie Paranormal Activity was released, we feared it would get worse if we shared our evidence. This was maybe 8 to 9 years ago, the first time I've spoken about it. Women's Refuge / Ghost. A women's refuge is for women who have escaped abusive relationships. Sometimes the women are found, beat, kidnapped, or sadly killed on the property. This was a 2-story home, 3 bedrooms downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs, along with the kitchen and lounge. First incident, my first night there. I was last awake upstairs, having a meal in dim light. In the corner of my eye, I see a tall shadow figure walk out of the room of one of the other women's doors. Thought it was hallucinating. I was extremely fatigued, previously starved and sleep deprived. Incident 2. My son woke us up after midnight screaming. Never had he screamed like this. I would soothe him, but every time he looked back at this one corner of my room, he would scream all over again. Personally, I didn't see anything, and again, didn't think too much of it. Incident 3. Now this one happened every night, and all of us women on the bottom floor thought nothing of it, until we all talked about it. One of the women mentioned it, so every night, us on the bottom floor would always hear the kids running around, stomping and playing. We found this weird purely because the children upstairs always went to bed well before we ended up in our rooms, but we never questioned it if the noise wasn't a problem. It wasn't until the mother told us her kids stay asleep once they go down that she wouldn't let them stomp around even if they were awake, as these incidents always happened late at night. Now the next incident is what freaked me the fuck out. Downstairs there's a door that's always opened. It leads to the stairs. This door was never closed. My room was furthest away from this door, and outside my room was a decent-sized area. There was a couch, a computer on a desk, a computer chair, and across from my room is the washer and dryer and a shower. Note, when you walk downstairs, this room is on the left. As you enter this door, you have to turn left again, which you will see 3 doors of our individual rooms. It's night. We're all upstairs in the lounge. We hear a thud. Nothing major, but I decided to go down and check my washing that was in the dryer. As I reach the stairs, I see that the door downstairs has been closed. Weird, but I carry on. I walk down, open the door, noticed the hallway light was off. That's when I felt really creeped out. I just got an uneasy feeling. Now the light that was falling in from behind me kind of shined some light into the dark hallway of where our rooms were. I looked in the door to the left. The computer was off, and just as I noticed that, the computer chair turned slowly toward my direction. I noped the fuck out of there, went upstairs and just waited for someone else to get down there. I followed them. I've had many paranormal experiences in the past, which I've told people about. They called me crazy, so no, I did not share this one with the others. Many other small things happened here, always at night, but I try not to be fearful, and sometimes acting oblivious or ignoring it was my way of not entertaining whatever was here. Sometimes it's okay to not want to know what's going on. I learned this the hard way in the past. There's some things you can't unsee, and some things you can't unhear. If I wasn't clear in the beginning, women and children had died in this house. I think I saw a ghost last night. Since I was a teen, I've had an interest in the supernatural, though more as an artistic and cultural expression rather than a real phenomenon. Overall, I'm a pretty difficult person to spook, both because I've been around horror media for years and because of my family history. But something happened last night that I just can't explain. I was sleeping with my husband. I woke up to someone calling my last name kind of urgently. My first instinct was that there was some sort of problem in the building. These were firefighters or first responders of some kind. I sat right up, and I could clearly see an old lady standing by the side of my bed. I adjusted myself, completely shocked to see her there. She didn't seem evil or angry, just a nice, if a bit surprised, old lady in a dress and a cardigan. When I reached out to her, she dematerialized in front of my eyes. My head started to hurt immediately after she basically dissolved into thin air. I know it wasn't a dream. I had to make the very conscious decision to go back to sleep and deal with it in the morning. I spent the whole day looking up what could possibly have caused this. Some people say it's sleep paralysis, but I had full control of my body, and she didn't feel threatening in any way. I actually was just surprised to see someone in my bedroom in the middle of the night. I've had vivid dreams before, but this wasn't that at all. Maybe it was just sleep paralysis, but it felt so real I figured I'd share the story, see if somebody else had been through it too. It's back. He saw it too. This is something I do not talk about. My husband is the only person that knows the entire event. I'm going to paraphrase to save time. About 4 years ago, we moved from Florida to North Carolina. My husband's in the towing industry. He went on assignment to Maryland for 6 months. While in our hometown with my dogs, I had a major shadow person infestation. My husband and I talked at night all the time, and he even saw it on a video call more than once. I felt like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I didn't sleep at night, turned on every light in the house. My husband is Catholic and was very involved as an altar boy from 6 to 19, so much so he had a free ride all through Catholic high school. This plays into the story later. Seeing these shadow things nightly had me to the point that I felt like it was possibly the beginning stages of a full-on possession in the making. When I say I saw them, it started off in the corner of my eye, and over time I could look at it straight on. So it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. Something in my eye, perhaps, lighting. My husband saw it twice while on video with me. My whole personality changed. I looked like I had an illness, and an illness that was eating me alive from the inside out. My husband would come home every few weeks for 2 days. When he was home, the activity was virtually non-existent, with the exception of hearing noises that we couldn't explain. He wrote those off as noises from the woods near our house. But when he was gone, I would call him on the brink of a complete panic. I wasn't afraid that it could hurt me physically as much as the emotional, mental, and physical drain it put on me. We discussed it trying to take possession of me. He reached out to his Catholic priest to explain the stages of demonic possession. He told me the first thing that seems to happen was a breaking down of the person mentally and physically. We were there. This all came to an end at one night. I was alone. I was freaked completely out. I had holy water in my home that was blessed by the Pope from the Vatican. I grabbed the holy water, walked around the house, and just sprayed everything. At the same time, I was screaming, telling it that it's not welcome, that I wasn't going to be afraid anymore, and if it was coming to get me, then to fucking make it happen. It broke. I could no longer live like this. The next morning, the whole house felt different. That night, I no longer saw the shadow figures in my home. It was an almost eerie quiet, with a whole new sense of calm. We do not talk about this ever. I can't even read or watch things having to do with shadow people because of my experience. I'm not saying it in the lightest terms, but I absolutely believe I have a form of PTSD from the events that transpired. We don't watch shows with it. We don't discuss it. So, fast forward a little over 4 years. We now live in a 3-story home. Our bedroom is on the top floor. It's a very quiet country neighborhood, meaning at 9 o'clock everything shuts down. My neighbors don't have lighting on their homes, other than their front porch light. We don't have parties here or police. It's very quiet, and it's dark at night. We were sitting in bed on the top of the 3rd-story floor watching TV. And in my hallway, I saw like a flashlight flashing around the walls. It was very fast, but I sat there and stared at it. So it wasn't like in the blink of an eye. It was more like somebody outside was shining a flashlight on the house, and it popped through the window. This is on the 3rd floor, so if it were a car, the light would never reach to the top level. It was only us in the house that we knew of. I looked at my husband and said, "Do you see the flashlight in the hallway just now?" To which he responded, "Nah," and started to stare. He jumped out of bed and got his gun, his flashlight. He started entering the hallway thinking somebody may have broken in. He goes through the whole top floor, checks behind the curtain in the bathroom, turns on all the lights, finds nothing. We even looked outside on both sides of the house to see if maybe something happened and someone was out there with a flashlight. Nothing. Dark black silence, like every normal night. He was in full protection mode at this point. I told him maybe it was a car, maybe it was a reflection off the TV, a couple other things that it could have caused. Make him calm down. He sat down on the bed and watched his frozen face. He stared blankly, fixated down the hall. He said, "Natalie, I'm watching a shadow go back and forth across our hallway. There's no light behind it, can't see through it to the window. He said it crossed 3 to 4 times. He sat there with a blank expression. In 24 years, I've never seen on him this sort of expression. He jumps up and turns on every single light again. He was clearly freaked out. It was starting to freak me out too. The minute he mentioned that shadow person, I thought they were back in my life again. I haven't felt this type of fear, panic, quite a few years. I feel like I'm on super high alert today as I'm typing this out. I don't feel safe to go back into my bedroom. I cannot relive this event again. I looked at him and said, "We do not talk about these things. We're not talking about what just happened. We do not say the word shadow around me ever again in your life. You can think it, but do not say it." After a while, he calmed down enough to lay down and go to sleep. I haven't slept yet. I just had to get this off my chest a little bit so I can breathe. I'm already dreading tonight, going to bed. I cannot have what I went through the last 6 months of my life to come back again. I was awoken to a growl in my ear. One night, while I was in a state of drifting to sleep, I wake up in a panic to a deep, evil-sounding growl in my ear. I say in my ear because it sounded so clear to the point where it was as if someone or something was lying next to me. Made this horrible noise directly into my ear, ASMR style. For context, this was a few years ago. This is when I shared a bedroom with my younger sister. I woke up with my heart racing, shaking. I stayed awake for hours after. I didn't want to be vulnerable to anything evil in my sleep, as I have a feeling it's easier for spirits to mess with you when you're in that state. A few weeks before this happened, I had gone to visit an old abandoned castle and church with my family in the Isle of Wight. We did this because my mom loves all things horror, and she loves exploring creepy places. While we visited, we messed about, didn't take it seriously. I remember me and my mom found a little underground part of the building. It had metal bars to block it off. Since we were messing around, I vaguely remember we grabbed the metal bars and shook it while saying, "Help," thinking that it was funny. I now realize I probably provoked an evil spirit. I also remember at the time I had a close friend who was involved in spiritual things. Could see spirits. I'm not sure if it believes me, but it was certainly believable and interesting to me. She used to tell me when she would see spirits. She told me she had one that followed her at the time. I'm not sure if it was evil, but I suspect it could have been from that as well. Maybe the spirit noticed me being close with her, was curious about me. A few nights after that, the growling happened. I would get woken up a lot by this thing that sounded like a man crying and whining, like an echo in my ear. As soon as I would wake up, it would fade away. I eventually ended up saying out loud, "Go away, leave me alone." It worked. It's been at least 4 years now since that happened. I've not experienced it again. I still wonder if maybe I was going crazy, or if it was actually paranormal. I used to have lunch with the wind. This place where I used to work at is located on a small boulevard, behind which an alley which separated the businesses from a residential area, a typical suburban zoning. It was my habit to walk to the nearby deli to get lunch, then find a nice spot in the adjoining neighborhood to eat it, typically on a curb, the shade of a tree. One day while looking for a likely place, I noticed a tree whipping around much the way they do when the wind comes heralding, like an approaching rainstorm. But this was a warm, still sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. I looked at the surrounding trees and shrubs, but all was calm. This one tree and this one tree alone was aggressively swaying to and fro. I decided to sit upon the curb opposite it, observe the situation, see if I could determine the source of this activity. As I watched, it became clear that there was no external wind which shook the leaves and branches, and indeed, there was no single direction in which they moved. It was as though it was being cavorted in, through, and around the tree, never going so slow as to disturb the grass or roil the dust in the gutter below, but content to remain up in the branches, twisting itself this way and that, seemingly delighted in making the leaves and branches flutter. I tried to see if I could use the movements to determine the directions that maybe this being was traveling, the course which it took, and so by doing get an idea as to its shape and form. But it was not possible, so I resigned to sit and eat my lunch as I watched the extraordinary display. When my break was over, I went back to work, leaving the tree unabatedly dancing. The next day I returned to see if it was still there. It wasn't, to my disappointment. I tried to communicate telepathically with it, didn't receive anything, nor saw any indication it was aware of my presence. It was like sitting in a park watching a child play, blissfully unaware it was being, observed, or watching a dog cavort about not knowing it was seen. The rest of the week, I would come, sit, and marvel. I figured that what I was witnessing was one of those two things. Either I was watching a discarnate being desperately trying to affect physical reality for purposes unknown to me, or what I was seeing was a small wind amusing itself. I came to accept the latter. I kind of figured a soul, whether it be a human or jinn, would recognize my attention, try to capitalize on it. But the being was blithely content to ignore me. I've since learned that such elemental incarnations are part of a development of souls, one of the many rungs on an eternal ladder. I myself have been such a force, learning my lesson as I assert myself over my environment, playing with clouds and birds and trees and fallen leaves, whipping the waters to and froth, gently rippling their surface. Astoundingly enough, now that I look back on it, I got bored, took to finding someplace less roilsome to have my lunch. In retrospect, it was my inability to interact with it that lost my interest. Curiously, I never approached it. I never stood beneath the tree as its leaves and branches spasmed about. And recall that, then as now, I felt honored to witness the wind at play, to have been given evidence that there is more, and that it was not for me to intrude. To this day, many decades later, when I drive past my old job place, I look down the street for the tree and think, that's where the wind was. Possible ghost trying to get my attention. I worked night shift at a medical lab. That's where I had a bit of a creepy experience a while ago. There's an area of the lab called stats, This is where we process specimens that need to be tested immediately. It's kind of isolated from the rest of the lab, and usually there's only 2 people at this station. Earlier in the night, one of my coworkers and I were exchanging scary stories that had really happened to us. It got me in a really spooky mood, because we talked about a lot of hauntings and paranormal experiences. At some point when I was on break, I was walking down the long empty hallway. My face was in my phone, and I suddenly felt like someone was walking right behind me. I thought it was my coworker. He liked to prank me and scare me a lot. But when I turned around, no one was there. The hall was completely empty. There was nowhere anybody could have hidden. So that freaked me out a little bit, especially after talking about scary experiences with my coworker. But I didn't read into it too much. Figured I was psyching myself out. At some point between 2 and 2:30, I was working at my station when I felt a distinct tap, tap, tap on the back of my chair. I turned around and was startled to see that no one was there. The only other person nearby was my partner on stats. She was working at another computer station, a good 10 feet or so away from me. I had reacted to the tapping immediately. There was physically no way she could have tapped my chair and jumped back to her station in the split second it took for me to turn around. That tripped me out, but again, I figured ghost stories had to be psyching me up. I was imagining things. But that tapping felt very real. I remember hearing the sound right before, feeling my chair vibrate like somebody was tapping on it. At this point, I should mention that phones aren't allowed in the stat station. So, mine was in the locker, which was nowhere nearby. When I got off work around 4 a.m., I discovered that my girlfriend had been trying to call and text me for almost 2 hours. I called her back. She said how she'd had a nightmare where I was hurt, and it gave her really bad anxiety. She'd been trying to call and make sure I was okay. I assured her I wasn't hurt. I got home safely, helped her calm down. Later on, I looked at her texts and calls. I noticed that they'd started around 2:30. I asked her what time she woke up. She said a little after 2. So she woke up within the same time frame that I thought I felt that tapping on my chair. It's most likely a coincidence. And again, I probably imagined the tapping because I've been sharing ghost stories and psyched myself out. But I also don't necessarily disbelieve the supernatural. And ever since that experience, I love to entertain the idea that a ghost was trying to get my attention and be like, "Hey, your girlfriend needs you, go check your phone." I posted about strange things going on outside my house. So here's what's going on inside. The first thing that happened was when my husband and I, boyfriend at the time, we were playing hide and go seek. We decided to take a break and watch a movie. I had to use the restroom, so away I went. I went into our guest bathroom, which is the only one downstairs besides the one in our master bedroom. It's located in the corner hallway next to the 2 spare rooms in the house. Currently, his office and our son's room. I went inside and quickly did my business. I don't like being alone for obvious reasons, I feel. Started to wash my hands. The sink is right next to the door. While I was drying my hands, I heard and saw, shadowing at the door, someone run up to the door, stop, turn around, and run into one of the adjacent rooms. Figured it was my husband. Maybe he was ready to start the game again. Ripped open the door. Fully searched each of the rooms and didn't find anyone, which should have if it was him. There was no way for him to run by the time whatever it was moved from the door. I opened it. I clearly saw the shadow go right toward the room, not to the left, toward the living room. The second thing that happened was my husband and I were playing pool, which is right next to our front door. Right after we broke, we heard a loud knock on the front door. We looked at each other, obviously confused as it was pretty late at night. We both went to the door and answered it. There was no one there. We both stepped out onto the porch to take a look around. We stayed out there for about 30 seconds or so to take a look around and headed back in. We were both shocked to see that the pool balls were in a straight line down the center of the pool table. It was very shocking since I had just mentioned it just broke and the pool balls were scattered when we exited. The third and most recent thing that happened was when I was alone in the house. Shocker. I was sweeping the steps since some of the plaster-like stuff on the ceiling had started to flake off and make a huge mess. I was cleaning up the landing at the top of the steps when I started mouthing off at the energy that I was feeling around me. I felt unwelcome in my own home, and that pissed me off. I know I shouldn't have said the things I did, but I was pissed, as this is my house. Well, right what I said here, but still live in this house. I don't want to put those words back into existence. You'll see why. There are 3 rooms upstairs, and all doors were closed during this time. Once I started getting really belligerent, all 3 doors started to shake violently in the door frames. It was as if there was someone behind each of them, just shaking and banging them against the frames. I immediately started having a panic attack, sank to the floor. I screamed out for whatever it was to stop and that I was sorry. And it did. I bolted down the stairs to find my phone and call my husband. As I was about halfway down, I felt a hard and violent shove at the center of my back. Almost caused me to tumble down the remainder of the steps. My husband never felt threatened in our home, but I constantly feel it, even before I made all those comments. And this all happened before the car started showing up. They were all several months apart. I'm not sure if this belongs here, but I need answers. This happened several times at this point. It started about 16 months ago when I was cleaning my house around 12 a.m. My husband, boyfriend at the time, worked nights, so I had to adjust to his schedule. I usually kept the blinds open during the day, would go around closing them at night. That was while I tidied up before bed. Our room was my last stop on the first night. The curtains and blinds were open as I was sweeping the floor when I felt the sensation of being watched. I looked around me when my eyes focused on this silver sedan parked outside my house, mostly in the grass in my front lawn. Now for context, my bedroom window is about 15 yards from the road at the front of my house. It's a small front yard in a pretty densely populated neighborhood. Anyway, I saw the car before I saw her or him, I'm not sure. But there was clearly someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car, and another person standing about 5 yards from my window. They were clearly staring at me. The only reason I could see this is because the moon was fairly bright this night. I shrieked, dropped to the floor, crawled to the light switch to turn it off so I could be seen. I called my husband to ask him what I should do. He told me to call the cops. Duh. I did, and of course by the time they got there, the car was gone. They asked if they could see my security footage. I agreed. But the footage from that section of time was just gone. skipped over the few minutes that they would have been outside. This has happened several times since then, and I've completely given up on calling the police, as I feel as if they'd think I'm crazy. I have no proof that this is happening, but I'd like to have some opinions as to why they may be doing this. In the past 16 months has happened probably 10 times. Sometimes the person is standing in the yard, sometimes they aren't. Also, the car has been at a different, been different every single time. But the light is always inside the cabin of the vehicle. But when I go to look, the people inside are never looking to where I can see their faces. I'll run to grab my phone to call someone. Anyone. They'll already be gone. The room in the back. When I was a kid in the 90s, I would often sleep at my grandmother's house. It was in the middle of a small village in the Jura region of France. The bedroom I would stay in was called the room in the back. As the name suggests, it was one of the last two rooms at the end of the main corridor shaped like an L. There wasn't anything special about that bedroom. It was pretty small, contained, had a bed, shelves with books, some other basic furniture. Yet for some reason that room creeped me out. Felt an unwelcoming presence, and I would always struggle to fall asleep, scared of whatever invisible forces seemed to be lurking in the dark. One night there, when I was around 8, I woke up scared and confused. I found myself lying down on the floor in total darkness. I feel I need to I just stumbled over my words. I feel I need to make two things clear here. This is the only time in my entire life that I've ever awoken outside of whatever bed or couch I had been sleeping in. The second thing to note is that despite the fact that the house is located in a small village, it wasn't particularly isolated, and the streetlights outside would always leave a bit of light filtering through the closed blinds at night. So here I was, a child, surrounded by total obscurity, struggling to understand why I wasn't in my bed. I tried my best to stay calm and touched around me, hoping to find the side of the bed nearby so I could climb back onto it. Simply could not find it. I tried for several minutes, but it just seemed not to be there, which was extremely strange considering that the bedroom wasn't that big in the first place. I therefore decided to move forward in a single direction to find a wall, one that which I could then follow until I would find the bed. Things just got even stranger as I tried to find a wall. I would bump into furniture I would not recognize, and despite all my efforts, I simply could not find one. Everything around me was completely and utterly unfamiliar. I thought about calling for help. My mother was sleeping in the bedroom on the other side of the corridor, and my parents in the living room. However, I imagined them finding me screaming on the floor and decided not to, not wanting to face that kind of embarrassment. Finally, I fell asleep on the floor, giving up on finding the bed. I woke up the next morning in that damn bed and under the blankets. It was like the entire event had been nothing more than a weird dream. Yet, it absolutely did not feel like a dream. I'm a natural lucid dreamer, and even back then I was kind of already very familiar with how dreams feel. And this just wasn't one, or at least I don't think it was. A few years ago, a long time after this strange occurrence, I went to England to visit my aunt, who's from the other side of my family. She claims to be a witch, and is into a lot of the New Age stuff. I've always been skeptical, but I had to admit, She's done and said a few strange things that got me to go from not believing her to being a bit more neutral about it. We were all talking about our respective families. She went on about one time where she had been in my grandmother's house. This is when I was a baby. I thought it was a good opportunity to see if she had sensed anything unusual there and asked her, making sure to keep the question open enough not to influence her. First thing she said, "Ah yes, the room in the back." She said in English and had no idea what we called it in French. "There's something wrong with that room." I was spooked. Today I got back to France. I decided to confront my mother about it, since she'd spent her childhood in that house. As soon as I asked her what the hell was wrong with the room in the back, she froze and her face became white. She explained to me that when she was little, she went in that bedroom with a few friends. They tried to invoke spirits for fun. They sat down on the floor in a circle holding hands and said, "Spirits, if you're here, knock 3 times. They immediately heard 3 violent knocks and ran off screaming. She told me that ever since, that room feels weird. And that's it. Nowadays, the room's kind of different. Still used as a guest bedroom. Still feels weird, but I'd say a lot less than when I was a kid. I know my brothers who are 10 years younger have also complained about feeling uncomfortable there for some reason. They never had any unusual experience there. Encounter with a demon or a shadow person. About 10 or so years ago, I have the house to myself, still living with parents at the time. I'm having a friend staying over. The night's going smoothly and pretty normal, playing co-op video games, as teenage boys do. But eventually we both end up on our phones scrolling through Tumblr. My friend stumbles upon a 40 to 50 minute audio tape file of a private investigator talking to a high school campus about his experience during a murder investigation he's conducted. I believe it took place in Texas. Long story short, towards the end of this audio file, it all leads up to the PI believing that the victim was exposed to a demon or an evil entity. Who was the reason for the death of this person? He states at the very end testimony of this case that this demon feeds off of your fear. The more you think about it, the stronger its energy and presence gets. As far as we could both tell, it was a real testimony and not a parody or creepypasta. So me and my friend heard the whole 40 or so minutes of the testimony. We were just enthralled, almost hypnotized by it. And afterward, we tried to go back to playing our games. Well, not 5 minutes later, the power in my room just goes out. No big deal. So I just go and flip the breaker, turn it back on. 3 minutes later, boom, again. Flip the breaker again. 1 minute later, boom again. This continues with shorter time frames until the power in my room just won't come back on. The first time it happens, we think it's mere coincidence. But by this point, fear is really happening. The thought of this entity is in our heads. At this point, about 12 to 1 a.m., my friend decides that this isn't worth it for him. Heads back to his place. Thanks, leaving me to myself. So the night goes on a little bit. And after the friend leaves, I spend the rest of the night in my living room. Lights on. I crash on the couch. I wake up with the TV still on. It's between 3 to 4 a.m. And I don't know what the fuck possessed me to go back to my room to sleep, but for some reason, I convinced myself it was all in my head. So I went to bed to go to sleep. I fall asleep incredibly fast. My dream begins with me in my bed in my room, just as I was laid out in real life, in the pitch black. This was extremely vivid and an exact replica of my room. I was as lucid as I would have been awake. But on top of one of the corners of my room, where the wall meets the ceiling, I saw a pair of angry, dirty-looking eyes. They were on a pitch blacker than black. It was hanging on my ceiling, staring into my soul. I was fixated on these eyes, and they were fixated on me. I was just in shock, couldn't move. But the second I tried to move at all, the figure just zoomed to another corner of my ceiling and then launched at me. I woke up in a sweat just before I got contacted. The dream felt so fucking real and vivid. I woke up literally screaming. There was a real sense of dread that took over my entire body in that moment. I felt mentally and physically sick. Power was still not working in my room, so I went out to the living room again, finished the night with all the lights on, not sleeping at all. Nothing more ever came from that night, but as far as I can tell and find, that audio tape never existed. Spent days upon days trying to find it multiple times all over the internet. Nothing even close comes up in my search results. By the way, power to my room worked perfectly the following day, at least after the sun rose. It's worked perfectly ever since. Ghost from Europe haunted me for over 2 years. This is my very real story that happened in 2014. My family flew from the US to Wales for my brother's wedding. We stayed in a very old remodeled barn party house in Abergavenny. It was right below the canal, and we had a free day before the wedding party. I was meeting at a local pub that night. I got back from a run at the canal, showered, and had time to take a nap, still a little jet-lagged before dinner. As I'm lying in bed, I feel the presence of a woman, and then feel the front side of a hand stroke my cheek. Then feel the entity jump on me and pin me to the bed, struggling, finally get free. I then hear a woman's cackle and laugh 3 times like, ha ha ha. This was witnessed. My door was half open. There was a sitting area outside. My mom was sitting there. She saw me laying in bed struggling. She didn't hear the laugh. Nothing else happened during the trip. The next month, I started dating a woman who would eventually move in and become my wife. This is when things started getting weird. Anytime she would spend the night, if we fall asleep with an arm or leg touching each other, we would both have terrible nightmares. I don't ever recall having bad dreams or nightmares. One that I recall vividly was an extremely old and wrinkled woman in black and white screaming at me in a foreign language I didn't understand. We would make a point to sleep far apart as possible to avoid the dreams. Then one night I have a dream. I'm in this astral plane. Everything is blue around me. Standing in front of me is a young petite woman. She was short, like 5 feet tall. Looked very European with a round face and dark blonde hair. She was dressed in a very period-correct plain cloth from a long time ago. Wasn't wearing any makeup. She walked up to me and said, "My name is Abigaila." And nothing else. Tried talking to her, but that's all she said. Now, I've never heard the name Abigaila in my life. If I Google it, I'd see it's Eastern European for Abigail. After that, Abigaila got really spiteful and tried to wreck our relationship. A couple of key things happened. Pulled my wife's hair. She was walking up her steps and was talking to me, and I see as if somebody grabbed her hair and yanked her down each step. She froze and we just looked at each other. Bent her engagement ring. It was on the dresser. And one morning she showed me that it was so smashed she couldn't get it on her ring finger. and to me, loaded a conversation from Google Hangouts when I was talking to another woman before I met my wife. I didn't even have Hangouts installed on the phone. The conversation happened on my previous phone. Thankfully, it was date-stamped, and I settled her down and showed her. Other small things like hiding stuff. Stuff was going missing constantly. One time we bought a bunch of meat, and it was in this huge bag. We'd set it down on the basement to put other groceries away, and it was gone. We looked everywhere, didn't find it until a year later when there was a bag of rotting meat in the basement. As the next couple of years went on, things started to die down. And when we married, they stopped. I guess she finally gave up. Never had any sage cleansing done, or had a medium visit the house because I didn't want to make things worse and present a challenge for the entity to fight. But I was researching mediums, and I was close. Is my house haunted? I'm a 16-year-old girl situated in India. My parents and my sister. We live in a street which is quiet. We don't get sounds except for occasional things like somebody's wedding, things like that. I live in a building where everyone moved out, leaving only my family and another guy's family. For a few months we were experiencing paranormal stuff, but they were unnoticeable. But for the first few days, it had been getting out of hand. And it's noticeable, even after I did everything in my mind, like using sage. I'll list a few of my experiences here, but before that, I'll explain how my house is. The main door in the living room is attached together, and it has a small washroom for guests. We don't use that washroom except, cleaning it once in every week. And 2 rooms. The very first experience happened in the living room. Me and my sister and my mother were chilling, sitting on the couch, when my sister pointed at something. I didn't care at first, but then I saw something in front of the living room washroom. The door was open. It was the shadow of a whole person, walking. Then it disappeared. We instantly checked the washroom. No one was inside there. There wasn't something there that would cause a shadow of a moving person. Then we saw stuff like sculptures moving, doors automatically opening. Then this experience happened in the living room once again. The washroom door was open and I looked at it. I caught a glimpse of a white face. Fully white, black spots in the place where the eyes are supposed to be. Then it vanished. This morning, I placed my pair of earphones in the middle of the stool. I sat down on the bed. After a few minutes, I heard a noise. Naturally, I looked up to see my earphone floating in midair for half a second. Then it fell on the ground. This same incident happened to me when I was doing chores one day in the kitchen, but with a spatula. I had more experiences about this, but my biggest question is my house haunted? Weird encounter in the Swiss Alps. This happened while I was doing my army service in Switzerland. I'm not really allowed to talk about what we were doing, but I'll try to keep things clear. I know that this sub is for real paranormal activities, and I know that everybody writing here will claim that his or her story is real, and me too. But this really happened to me back in 2011. My company had installed a huge antenna, and it had to be guarded by 2 soldiers, day and night. We were on the top of a hill, far away from any city and near a huge forest. It was 1800 hours. I had just started my watch of 6 hours with another soldier. Everything went fine. We smoked cigarettes, kept ourselves occupied until our watch ended at midnight. Then we received a call from our superior. He told us that one of the soldiers that was supposed to take the watch couldn't come, and one of us had to stay for another watch of 6 hours. Well, we tossed a coin to see who would stay from midnight to 6. With temperatures of around -20 Celsius. Of course, I lost. I had to wait for the other soldier to come and join me for the night watch. They didn't send the best because I knew he would sleep all night when I saw him climbing the hill with his sleeping bag. And that's what he did. He immediately took place in the tent, fell asleep. It was the coldest and longest night of my life. But nothing special about it. The weird part happened in the morning. We received another call from our superior. He told us that we had an NBC exercise. It means that we all, to wear all day long our NBC suit. That's short for an anti-chemical suit. The one with the gas mask and everything that goes with it. I was really upset and exhausted because I wasn't able to sleep with that thing on. And sleep was my only reward after that 12-hour watch. Well, I got out of the tent, and this is where I saw something. There was a woman standing next to our antenna. She wasn't moving, she was just standing there, 5 meters from the tent. I couldn't see her face because the sun was starting to rise behind her, like a locked fighter in Tekken, really. I knew she was a woman because she had really long hair, and she had curves. Remember, we were in the middle of nowhere, and this lady was standing there, not moving, like she was frozen. Started to freak out. Called the other guy to show him what it was that I was looking at. I don't know why, but he wasn't scared at all. He told her to leave because she isn't allowed there. She didn't make a move. She just stood there looking at us, or at least in our direction. And this lasted for at least a minute or two. I was so confused how a woman could ignore 2 soldiers telling her to leave a forbidden area. I mean, we're in Switzerland. The army's not that impressive, I know, but people usually don't do these kinds of things. They would just move away, especially when it's 6 in the morning. And what was she doing in the middle of nowhere? Obviously not dressed for this cold weather. How long was she standing there? And how did she end up here? I didn't hear any footsteps. So many questions ran through my mind at that moment. The other soldier didn't think twice, started walking towards her. When he almost reached her, he started running very fast. She ran directly into the forest nearby. I saw her getting deep into the forest and she disappeared from our sight. I'm really a rational thinker. I question everything and think that there's always an explanation. For me, the explanation is that she was simply a jogger because of the way she ran to the forest. But almost 3 minutes had passed between the first time I saw her and the moment she started running away. 3 minutes of not moving at all, looking at me, dressed in something really tight with -20 degrees and in the middle of nowhere.